we have a lot of videos about taxes in Germany, and we tell people that it's a good idea to file their taxes because it's not mandatory. And if it's not mandatory, it's probably because a lot of people get money back. That's why the government made it voluntary. If they made it mandatory, it would mean the government would get a lot of money back. But maybe not everyone gets money back. So the question is really, and that's a question the community asks a lot, who should file a tax declaration and for who is it really worth it? Because it is a little bit of work.
Yes, I mean, first, we have to get rid of one big misunderstanding. Filing a tax return is for most people mandatory, for most people who earn income. There are some exceptions, right, where you are not required to file a tax return. So basically, the three main exceptions are that you are earning below the basic tax-free amount, which is for 22 10,347 euro for a single person. If you are married, then that amount doubles.
Where you pay zero tax.
Where you pay zero tax, then there's no requirement to file a tax return. The other exception is that if the taxes are already paid via a tax withholding, and that is usually if you are in employment and or if you have basically capital income, so income from dividend interest or capital gains from which a tax withholding is conducted, right? Which is usually done via German institutions. So that also means if you have foreign interest or dividends, there's no tax withholding for Germany, so then you are already in the requirement to file a tax return. If you are but that means that let me show you some examples. So if you are in employment, you have to file a tax return.
Yeah.
Right. That is if you have additional income. So that means you have employment income and other income from a small side self-employment or something like this, right? So
real estate, maybe rental income.
Yes, yeah, that's an addition. Real estate, or if you are working as an influencer and have, let's say, you're on 1,000 euros a year, then you are required to file a tax return, or you give some yoga lessons or whatever, right? So if you are in more than one employment, so you have you work in your evening hours as an employed taxi driver besides your other job, right? But that is then when you usually, this is usually a tax at tax class 6. So if you are 1 in 6, then you are required to file a tax return. You're also required to file a tax return if you are married and you choose tax class 3 and 5, right? So then in any case, there's a requirement. Only if you choose for tax class 4 or 4, then and all the other conditions are fulfilled, there's no requirement to file a tax return. Then the other point is you have the possibility, if you are making losses, let's say from real estate, then you can have a negative amount put on your tax card, which lowers your monthly tax withholding. If that is done, you're also required to file a tax return. Yeah? Or if you received income which covers several years. So, for example, a bonus payment for 5 years, right, which covers 5 years. So that is usually the case if you are in a higher position at a banking institution. So there are special requirements for this bonus deferrals. Or if you received gains from stock options or restricted stock units, which is a common remuneration or part of the remuneration in startups, for example, right? So then you are required to file a tax return. Yeah. So and that means that the standard procedure is there is a requirement, right? So, but if you are not required, right? Because you were on tax class 1 for the year, you are single, no other income, no requirement. But you have the chance to file a tax return in order to deduct expenses, which will lower your tax rate at the end of the year, right? And this might be you have higher business expenses, right? So there's a general or a lump sum business expense deduction, right, which was €1,000 in 22, but it's now increased to €1,200, right?
The Werbekostenpauschale is the German, right?
Werbekostenpauschbetrag, yes, right? Or if you have special expenses, so like if you increase pension contributions, if you pay alimony to your ex-wife, if you make donations, if you pay church tax, just to name a few, right? Or you have extraordinary expenses. So that might be support of disabled person, or your person are disabled, right? And then you get higher deduction, which you only can claim by a tax return. Or you have huge healthcare costs, right? Then that might be worthwhile thinking about finding a tax return. And one important point is that if you have received income just for part of a year, so let's say you studied and you start working on 1st of July, right? Then basically, since July, your tax withholding is done on a monthly basis. But with filing a tax return, right? Then this 6 month income will be split over the whole year, which lowers your tax rate significantly and will lead into a refund, right? So these are basically some of the main circumstances when it does make sense to file a tax return.
Okay. One question to that. If I start working in July, would my first July payslip be as if I would have worked from January to June as well? Or do they account for that I only work for 6 months this year?
The tax is calculated on a monthly tax table.
Okay.
Right?
So they deduct basically twice as much as they should. Roughly.
With looking at the end result, yes. But of course, the monthly deduction, the monthly table is correct because your employer does not know if you just changed the job and had a job for the first 6 months or if you were doing nothing.
Yeah.
Right? So the employer is required to withhold taxes on a monthly, according to the monthly table. There's no way out of it. But as I said, with filing the tax return, that will be leveled out. Yeah. Another point is, which is important in that context. So if you move to Germany, right? Let's say you worked, let's assume in France, the first half of the year, and you're coming to Germany 1st of July, then the same applies. However, in this case, you are required to file a tax return because the income which you earned in France in the first half of the year has to be declared in Germany as well and will influence your tax rate in Germany. And that is called a progression clause. And if your progression income is more than €400 a year or 410, then you are required to file a tax return. So, and then it basically depends on if your French income was higher or lower than the income in Germany. So if the income in France was higher, then it will increase your tax rate. So it's not clear that you receive a tax refund. It might be a tax payment, which you have to do. If the income was lower, then it might be a tax refund, right? So it might be level out anyway, because in the year of your move, you might claim some more expenses like double household or moving costs and so on. That this progression clause will be mitigated at the end of the day, right? But important for you is have to file a tax return, irrespective of the outcome, if it's a refund or a payment.
If people have further tax questions, Dirk, how can you help?
I mean, of course, you have to contact me, right? And then basically what I do is I conduct a Zoom meeting for a quarter of an hour to get to know the person, the requirements, and the topic and the expectations. And then tax advice has a lot to do with trust, right? So both parties, so you and I have to say, okay, we can work together, right? It does fit, right? And I have the trust in that person, right? And then based then on the information I get from the interview, then I can basically talk about the process, how it works, and of course also about the fees. What does it cost?